What is going on? Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, the show that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn, the Mixtape Doctor, here with a musical prescription to cure whatever ails you. Believe it or not, one of my buddies sent that in to me and I just had to throw it into the intro. Sorry about that. Thank you, Bob, for that one. I love it. Hope you guys are doing well. I am back with another wheel spin episode where I am going to try to build a playlist based entirely off of one of your suggestions. Now, the first question is, how do you get those suggestions to me? It is really easy. myweeklymixtape@gmail.com. You can find me on all the social media haunts at myweeklymixtape. You can join the Mixtaper community over at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape, where it's free to join, as well as other tiers that offer different benefits. And then the main website, myweeklymixtape.com. Send in your suggestions. I have got a lot of them to go through, and I am excited to see where we are going to go each and every week on this new season of My Weekly Mixtape. So without wasting any further time, let's press the wheel and see what today's topic is gonna be. Haha, there it is. Thank you, Jay Sweet. I knew I could rely on you to get some 80s into this fold, and you did that. This actually goes all the way back to the discussion that you and I had prior to going to see Poison and Cheap Trick, the concert that actually launched the Tune Styles concept that you and I did, and you have not disappointed with this topic, hair bands that broke the mold and still sound relevant today. Whew. Well, I've got a lot to dissect just in the name of this playlist alone before we get to the songs. First off, this playlist will be coming from a place of love. I love 80s hair bands. I want to state that with exclamation points and be very clear about this. There is no irony in this episode. 80s hair bands was the first time that I branched away from my parents and started discovering music on my own via the radio, via 1480 Z-Rock. They were an AM radio station that played a lot of hard rock and heavy metal, via MTV. This was where I started becoming a fan of music through my own choices, not the music that I was listening to with my parents. So this is actually a very important topic for me. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of stigmas around hair bands. There are a lot of misconceptions with hair bands. So let's define the way I'm going to talk about hair bands tonight. First off, there are bands that are undeniably part of the hair band scene. Poison, Slaughter, Warrant, Motley Crue, Faster Pussycat, Pretty Boy Floyd, Trickster, groups like that. Those are undeniable hair bands that anybody that listens to Hair Nation on Sirius XM, you hear a ton of those bands. Then there's the hair band adjacent groups. These are groups that I'd say weave in and out of the hair band sound depending on what album you're talking about, or even diving deeper into a specific song. These would be groups like Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, and Skid Row. Then there's the Guilty by MTV Association. Yes, there are a ton of bands because MTV was playing rock music at the time, and they would just mix all these music videos together, and bands got lumped into the hair band / hair metal sound, whether they were a part of it or not. Right off the top of my head, I can think of Aerosmith, Kiss, Alice Cooper, and Heart. These are 70s bands. Some might refer to them as classic rock bands, but in the 80s, they became part of that quote-unquote hair band conversation. Then you have groups like Guns N' Roses and Tesla, who to me were more straightforward hard rock. And even back on season 1, when Frank Hannon of Tesla joined the show, he stated himself that he never considered Tesla a hair metal band, even though they consistently got lumped into that category. So if you want to hear more about Tesla, definitely check out the Tesla episode from season one of my favorite hard rock bands. But look, they do get lumped into that discussion. I guess the big question is, will they get lumped into my 10 hairband songs that broke the mold playlist tonight? You're going to find out, but first, let me just take a minute to remind you, all of the songs I'll be discussing tonight can be found over on the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com. So as I lead into this first pick, I think it's important to talk about timing here. Hairbands people automatically lump into the 80s, the late 80s. I'd say 1985 through 1989. However, there was still all of 1990 and all of 1991 where hairbands were still a big deal until that 44-day stretch. And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but there's a meme that goes out all over social media, and it is a stack of cassettes that were all released within 44 days of each other, a little over a month and a half. That being Metallica's Black Album, Pearl Jam's 10, Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic, Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, and Nirvana's Nevermind. From that point on, the conversation changed. But prior to those albums, Skid Row released their follow-up to their self-titled album. And it kicked off with one of my favorite songs from that era. Now, like I said earlier, Skid Row, hairband adjacent, because the Slave to the Grind album in 1991 is far from anything that would be considered a hairband. However, songs like I Remember You get them into that hairband adjacent category, the big power ballad. It's found on every hairband power ballad compilation that's probably ever been released. But even taking that into consideration, Slave to the Grind kind of thumbs their nose at anything from the self-titled album in a way, because the heaviest song on Skid Row's self-titled could be arguably Piece of Me. And I think even that isn't heavy enough for the sound on Slave to the Grind. Slave to the Grind was an album that kind of bridged the gap between the 80s hairband sound and 90s straight up hard rock and some metal. And that's evident in the fact that Skid Row brought out Pantera on the Slave to the Grind tour in 1992. Talk about distancing yourself from that hairband discussion. Pantera did it, even though back in the early 80s on power metal, Pantera was at one point also a hairband, but don't expect to hear them playing any of those songs on their current reunion tour. But I digress. Back to Skid Row and that Slave to the Grind album, the song that I chose to kick things off tonight was the, don't be too shocked by this one, album opening track, Monkey Business. That insane opening guitar that is darker and grittier than anything that you had heard from Skid Row prior. Sebastian Bach's lower register opening verse leading into a scream that could probably shatter all the glass within 50 feet of you. I suggest you don't try that at home. It is one of those visceral screams that will easily go down in history as one of my favorite hard rock moments of all time. It completely solidified Sebastian Bach in the hard rock pantheon of vocalists as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that scream is on such another level. I almost forgive all of his appearances on the Gilmore Girls. No, I'm kidding. My wife loves that show, and she has it on all the time, and I always walk in and see him in the episodes, and then I'll go throw some Skid Row on, and I'm like, you realize that's the same guy right there. But anyway, I digress. Monkey Business is a song that dropped all the sex and all the excess that pretty much became synonymous with the scene in and of itself. And I think that might be a theme with the songs I'm going to pick tonight, because when people think of hair bands, they automatically think sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And the rock and roll is definitely going to be there. And I don't think I'm shattering any proverbial glass here when I say the drugs were probably there and then some. And probably same goes for the sex, but that was backstage after the show. I feel like the songs that I'm going to be looking towards tonight are ones where these bands started backing away from the sex-fueled lyrics that kind of fueled the earlier parts of their career. And I think the next song that I'm going to choose after Skid Row's Monkey Business is kind of a prime example of that, but also a double-edged sword, because the album that it comes from is completely 100% all in on the sex, and that's Warrant's Cherry Pie. But that's not the song I'm choosing tonight, because Cherry Pie wasn't even originally supposed to be on the album. The label demanded the band record a radio-friendly song after the album was turned in. Jani Lane wrote Cherry Pie in 15 minutes. And it was recorded very quickly. CeCe DeVille came in and played guitar on it, and they had their sex anthem that unfortunately became what Warrant was known for. And I think that's unfair, because the song that follows up Cherry Pie on the Cherry Pie album is truly who Jani Lane was as a songwriter, and that is Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is a story-driven song. This is a serious song. This is a song that paints a picture and is dark, haunting, and a complete 180 when it's back-to-back with Cherry Pie. And the Cherry Pie album as a whole has its moments that would harken back to the dirty, rotten, filthy, stinking rich sound, but it was a more mature Warrant album. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts that had Cherry Pie not been included, Warrant's trajectory would have been different. They would not have been known as the Cherry Pie Band. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure they love the residuals from it. There probably has not been a Warrant concert that has not featured Cherry Pie. People do love that song. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the lighter side of Warrant. It's the tongue-in-cheek side of Warrant. It's not what Warrant should only be known for. And Uncle Tom's Cabin is my argument for that. Now, regardless of Uncle Tom's Cabin or not, Warrant is always going to be lumped in with the hair band sound. That's just a fact they'll never escape. And the next song I'm going to pick is another band that is always going to be lumped into the hair band sound, no matter what they do. And I think I have another song from this band that makes a good argument that they were more than Girls, Girls, Girls and their cover of Smokin' in the Boys' Room. And yes, I'm talking about Motley Crue. Dr. Feelgood is one of those albums that you could tell things were changing from the Girls, Girls, Girls era. They still had some of that party hairband sound. They had the power ballads, but there were certain raw, darker moments that were starting to appear, hell, right from the get-go in the title track of the album. However, back to 1991 again, on the Decade of Decadence compilation, they released the original single Primal Scream. This is darker than anything on Dr. Feelgood. It's more aggressive. It's more raw. Think about the groove that's being laid down in Primal Scream, and then listen back to Smokin' in the Boys' Room, Girls, Girls, Girls. This is heavy. This is more of the glam that you would have gotten on Shout at the Devil, mixed in with where the music scene was headed in the early 1990s. Nicky's bass is driving. Then you've got Mick Mars with it. It's a masterclass what Mick Mars is doing on this tune. From the slide guitars to the endless riffage that's happening on this track. There are so many moments that I think you could conceivably pull a riff out of Primal Scream and use it as a completely separate song. And it feels like somehow they were able to just put them all together and make it work perfectly. Vince Neil's vocals are raw and gritty and powerful at this time. I know there's a lot that people say about his vocals now, but back in 1991, he was at his peak, and you hear it on this song. And I feel like Primal Scream was leading into what would happen with John Corabi on the self-titled album in 1994. However, at that point, Vince wasn't in the band, but you can hear elements of where they were headed musically on Primal Scream. And I don't think I can lump anything from the Corabi-fronted self-titled album in the quote-unquote hairband sound, because it truly wasn't. Truly stands out as a 90s hard rock album, period, hard stop. However, Primal Scream, while it's leaning towards that 94 sound, definitely still has elements that I think fit well into this playlist. So we've got 3 songs so far. All are, I'd say, leaning on the dark side of the spectrum. So let's loosen things up a little bit and go with a band that is probably the poster child for hair bands, and that is Poison. The Look What the Cat Dragged In album cover, I Want Action, Talk Dirty to Me, then following it up with Open Up and Say Ah, Nothing But a Good Time, Fallen Angel, Every Rose Has Its Thorn. Yeah, I get why people consider them the poster child for hair bands. But on 1990s Flesh and Blood, that same maturing that I talked about on Warrant's Cherry Pie, sans the title track, started coming out for Poison. Now, I know there's some people listening out there that are immediately laughing as I'm saying this because they're thinking, Brian, dude, Unskinny Bop, come on. And you're right. Unskinny Bop is still definitely in that sex, drugs, rock and roll, party all the time, hairband sound. But very similar to how Uncle Tom's Cabin followed up Cherry Pie, the song that follows Unskinny Bop on Flesh and Blood is a track called Let It Play. It's an album cut, was never released as a single, which is a crime as far as I'm concerned, because the song is ridiculously catchy, it's fun, and it still has that big anthemic chorus that's a signature of the hairband sound. Why this wasn't released as a single, I'll never understand, and it is my absolute favorite Poison song of all time. This is a song where you start hearing the more mature glimpses of Poison that they would take to the next level with Richie Kotzen on lead guitar instead of CeCe DeVille on 1993's Native Tongue. They weren't quite there yet, but this was the transition from the Open Up and Say Ah sound to the Native Tongue sound. At the end of the song, when Ricky Rocket goes double time and the band just starts jamming out, almost feels gospel-esque in nature. Yeah, I said it. The only critique I have of the song is that segment should have led into a guitar solo where CeCe just took it to the house and they stayed at that tempo instead of bringing it right back to close it out. I feel like the song should have been longer. I feel like I'm missing out. And if I ever get a chance to interview somebody from Poison, I'm going to ask if that was ever a consideration, because I feel like had that song been opened up a little bit more, it'd be your perfect concert closer for Poison. Yes, even over Nothing But a Good Time. And I should also add that Poison is always going to get a hall pass from me musically. One, just because I simply love their music. I'll never be ashamed of it. Some people, when I mention I like Poison, they kind of try to give me guff about it. And I could care less if anybody tries to give me guff about any music I enjoy, because if there's a song you like, you should not give a flying you-know-what about what anybody thinks about it. Listen to it and enjoy it. That's all that this is about. But that being said, Poison was the first band I ever saw live. April 7th, 1988, Brendan Byrne Arena, East Rutherford, New Jersey. Opening for David Lee Roth on the Skyscraper Tour. The first time I sat in an arena and the lights dimmed, Poison came out and launched into Look What the Cat Dragged In. So as far as I'm concerned, they are always going to have a special place in my heart for music, period. But now I'm going to piss some people off. because I mentioned that they were bands that got lumped in. Guilty by MTV Association that I said at the top of the show. And I can't talk about my first concert with Poison and not bring David Lee Roth into the mix. Was David Lee Roth a hair band? No. It's Van Halen. Come on. Hair band adjacent? No. Van Halen? No. If anything, Van Halen at the time would lean more towards arena rock than they would hair band. However, David Lee Roth's Skyscraper album? MTV, guilty by association, just like Paradise, was lumped into all the same music videos. And hell, Poison was the opening band. They were trying to combine the sound, opening up David Lee Roth's solo material to the sound that was exploding at the time. So do I consider David Lee Roth a hair band? No. But there's a place on this playlist that he deserves to be on it for. And it's the breaking the mold part. I mean, Skyscraper is essentially David Lee Roth's Eat 'Em and Smile lineup of Steve Vai, Billy Sheehan, and Greg Bissonette, except you're adding in Brett Tuggle to the fold. That's really the only difference. The talent was off the charts for this group. But the song that I chose, I don't even know if you'd call this a power ballad, but it's definitely a ballad. And it's the most ballady thing I think David Lee Roth's ever done. And it's a 180 from everything that you had heard from David Lee Roth, at least up until this point. And I'm going to go with Damn Good. It was the third single from the album. It did track on the US Billboard Rock chart, but didn't really make a huge dent. But this is some Zeppelin-esque, bluesy, masterful guitar work from Steve Vai on this track. I mean, I get lost listening to the music on this track. It is so hypnotizing. And this is David Lee Roth singing in a completely different register. You're not getting the high screeches. This is Dave with a low, mellow, almost reflective swagger to his voice. There's such a coolness factor to this track. You know, when you think about Snoopy and Joe Cool with the sunglasses, this is that in musical form. Yeah, I know. Look, I like Peanuts. I grew up with Peanuts. Yeah, I used a Snoopy reference. Sue me. David Lee Roth's Damn Good is just one of those songs that takes the idea of a power ballad and just takes it to a different level in a way that you could have never expected. And when I play this song now, hell, when I announced that I was coming back to my weekly mixtape, I used this song on one of my social media posts and got some thumbs up from people purely based on that fact. Damn Good is indeed damn good. And as far as I'm concerned, because it's track 5, a perfect way to close out the first half of this 10 80s songs that broke the mold playlist, which I kicked off with Skid Row's Monkey Business, followed up by Warrant's Uncle Tom's Cabin, Motley Crue's Primal Scream, Poison's Let It Play, and in a synergy, the way Poison opened for David Lee Roth back in April of 1988, closed up the side with David Lee Roth's Damn Good. Just a reminder, you can hear all the songs I'm talking about tonight over on the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com. And now for the second half of this 10 hairband songs that broke the mold playlist. The song I'm going to start with, I feel like, is another example of MTV adjacent. Are they really a hairband? No. They were around a lot longer before Here I Go Again and Tawny Kitaen made them the MTV darlings that they were. And I'm talking about Whitesnake and their self-titled 1987 album. This is the closest thing to a quote-unquote hair band that Whitesnake ever became. However, Here I Go Again is not the song I'm using here. But Still of the Night, that is bluesy, raw, aggressive, and it has some ridiculous dynamics throughout the track. But before we even get to the roller coaster that this song is, John Sykes' riff, is up there as far as I'm concerned with Cult of Personality by Living Colour. It's one of the greatest riffs of the decade. David Coverdale's vocals are stratospheric on this track, to the point where when a band covers it, it needs to be female fronted, like when Hailstorm did it on their Reanimate EP. And they did a hell of a job of it, I do have to say. Or a male fronted band drops it a few steps the way Static X did on Cult of Static back in the late 2000s. But this was a song that was played on MTV endlessly, looped in with all the hair bands. Was it a hair band? No. But I've turned on Hair Nation before on Sirius XM and heard this song. So somewhere along the dotted line, it got lumped in. So as far as I'm concerned, it's fair game for this playlist. Now we talk about John Sykes on guitar. He's incredible. As is Nuno Bettencourt, another virtuoso, completely undeniable. But when people talk about Extreme, they immediately go to More Than Words. Hell, Weird Al did the style parody of the More Than Words video for his You Don't Love Me Anymore song. Extreme is not a hair band. I mean, I'd say they're more of a funky hard rock band. Hell, there's a song on the album called Get the Funk Out, and they use horns on a track called Little Jack Horny. And the dad joke loving, ironic person that I am considers that to be the chef's kiss, which leads me to the fact that I had a hard time getting this cassette in 1990 because there was a parental advisory sticker on it. I don't know if there's that many curses on this album, if any at all, but I had to convince my parents that this wasn't going to be another Two Live Crew situation. And if you don't know what I mean by the Two Live Crew situation, if you heard the song Me So Horny on the radio, and then your parents bought you the As Nasty As They Wanna Be cassette, and you put that cassette in the car on the ride home, that car got turned around and that cassette got returned faster than you can imagine. Why do I say that? Because that's exactly how it happened. And I learned a tough lesson in radio versions being completely different than what you hear on the album. So because of that, thank you, Luke Campbell, I had a hard time convincing my parents whenever there was a parental advisory sticker to get the album. And with a title of Porno Graffiti, Extreme was not making it easy on me. My parents truly thought that Get the Funk Out was not funk. Thankfully, I had older cousins who vouched for the fact that it was indeed funk, and they let me get the album. And then with some synergy and a throwback to Skid Row's Monkey Business, like I talked about on side A of this little 10-song mixtape, Skid Row had the other Get the You Know What out on Slave to the Grind, if you got the right version, of course. But that said, I discovered Extreme on 1480 Z-Rock, AM radio, and the song that blew my mind was Decadence Dance, the album opener. Surprised? Another album opener. Nuno's riff on this track is just unbelievable. Gary Sharone's vocals, when people talk about, oh, well, Gary Sharone, you know, how did he get into Van Halen? Listen to the vocals on Decadence Dance. I'm sure when Eddie heard that, he said, I could work with that. This song is unfriggin' believable. And Nuno is probably one of the most underrated guitarists on the planet. He's been in Rihanna's touring band for a long time. Recently, when they were paying tribute to Ozzy Osbourne on the MTV Video Music Awards, Youngblood came out and did Crazy Train with who on lead guitar? Nuno. People don't talk about Nuno Bettencourt as much as they should. And that paired with a song that, as far as I'm concerned, still rocks to this day, Decadence Dance, definitely makes this list. So we've got 3 songs left in this breaking the mold discussion. And while we're on the topic of virtuosos, let's stay there. I've been blessed enough to say that one of my favorite bass players on the planet has been a 2-time guest on my weekly mixtape in season 1, that being the legendary Billy Sheehan. And I mentioned him earlier because he played in David Lee Roth's band. But in 1989, Mr. Big came out with their self-titled album. And in the late 80s, there was this thing called Personics cassettes. What Personics was a precursor to iTunes, because you can go into a music store, open up a book, pick out a bunch of songs, fill out a card, hand it to the cashier behind the counter, and they would custom make you a mixtape with printed labels and all the songs you want. You paid by the song. Sound familiar? One of the first cassettes I got had Addicted to That Rush on it. And if I'm able to dig that out, I will take a picture and post it on the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com. When I first heard that Billy Sheehan bass line opening up the track, which I do want to thank him on the Mr. Big episode during his intro, he played that during the intro, which was one of the coolest moments in My Weekly Mixtape history as far as I'm concerned. But Mr. Big gets lumped into the hair bands because of To Be With You. Of course, the campfire hit. And Billy's quite thankful for it. He's talked about it on the show. That hit's probably paid a ton of bills for him over the years. And who wouldn't be grateful for a #1 hit song? But that's not what Mr. Big is about. Addicted to That Rush. Sorry, opening track again. 1989's Mr. Big. Listen to the absolute insanity that's happening at the beginning of this track, and there is my case for why it broke the mold and deserves to be on this playlist. And anything I could say about Mr. Big, Billy says much better, so be sure to go and check out the Mr. Big episode, as well as the episode I did way back at the beginning of My Weekly Mixtape. I want to say it was done in the first 15 episodes, all about songs from throughout Billy's career, including the David Lee Roth era, Mr. Big, Niacin, Tallis. It's a really, really in-depth, fun interview, so be sure to check both of those out. Now, in mentioning the whole Billy Sheehan connection to David Lee Roth, we talked about Damn Good being kind of a power ballad, but not. And I feel like we need one of those on side B. But I also want to break the mold some more, because there's something we have not introduced into this playlist yet. And that's the female element of hair bands. Most people don't talk about Vixen immediately when they bring up hair bands, and they really should, or Girl School. And then there were poppin' new wave bands that somehow got lumped in. When the Bangles did Hazy Shade of Winter, it started getting lumped into hair band. I'm like, no, stop. However, you think about the Runaways. Then you had Joan Jett come out and do Little Liar, and she started getting lumped into hair bands. And what? I mean, it was written by Desmond Child, who wrote for Bon Jovi, who wrote for Alice Cooper, who wrote for everybody. 2 great Desmond Child episodes back in the season 1 catalog, if you want to listen to those. He is just an endless source of amazing music stories, so highly recommend that. But we need to break the glass ceiling here and bring in some female representation on this. And I think the best power ballad by a female artist in the 80s is also a duet with somebody else that gets kind of lumped in to the hair band scene undeservedly. And I'm going to go with Lita Ford and Ozzy Osbourne's Close My Eyes Forever. It's the highest charting song for either of them. Wrap your mind around that. It's Ozzy's highest charting song. It's an incredible duet. Unbelievable duet. Shattered what people considered power ballads to be. This was not Warrant's Heaven, Poison's Every Rose Has Its Thorn, Motley Crue's Home Sweet Home. This was dark. This was haunting. Completely against the grain of what people considered a power ballad to be. Do I consider Lita Ford a hair metal, hair band? I consider her to be a hard rock artist. But the hair on the album cover says otherwise. So there it is. Kiss Me Deadly, again, gets lumped in. You can make arguments for it in either direction. But Close My Eyes Forever is one of those songs that, man, especially now with Ozzy gone, just hits on a completely different level. I mean, Ozzy had a ton of great power ballads. Goodbye to Romance, Time After Time, Mama, I'm Coming Home. Close My Eyes Forever ranked higher than all of them. And I have to say, his voice and Lita's together, unbelievable. It kind of breaks my heart that we'll never see them do that collaboration live again, though. But coming out of that, we need to close this playlist up. And Close My Eyes Forever is pretty damn dark. So we need to do a 180 record scratch and rock this thing out for a close. And during the Tune Styles days, I was fortunate enough to have Tom Kiefer on the program. And we got to talk all things Cinderella, including the hairband idea. You know what? That episode's kind of been in the archives for a long time because when Tune Styles went off the air, it kind of disappeared from the internet. I might need to bring that back because if I'm looking at his catalog correctly, he hasn't released anything since, so it's still quote unquote timely. And we dive into a ton of great Cinderella stories. Do I consider Cinderella hairband? Night songs, yes. However, from Long Cold Winter on, no. Because that's when he started bringing in a lot more of the blues edge. I mean, he really brought it on Heartbreak Station, but that's not where I'm going. I'm going to stick with something from Long Cold Winter here. And we're going to go with what I consider to be the ultimate 80s hard rock hairband road trip song. That being Gypsy Road. Unbelievable, dirty riff, sing-along chorus that just raises the roof. One of my favorite Cinderella songs of all time. And something that even now, every time it comes on, I have to turn the speakers up as loud as I can, lower the windows, put my arm out, and just take the song in. And I think it's the perfect exclamation point to the end of this side of 80s hairband songs that broke the mold, which kicked off with Whitesnake's Still of the Night, and then followed up with Extreme's Decadence Dance, Mr. Big's Addicted to That Rush, Lita Ford and Ozzy Osbourne's Close My Eyes Forever, and Cinderella's Gypsy Road. And just as a reminder, I have a playlist of all the songs I've talked about tonight embedded on this episode page over at myweeklymixtape.com if you want to give any of these songs a listen. Now, let's keep this conversation going. Is there a song that you would add to this playlist? Is there a song that you feel broke the hairband mold and still holds up to this day? I want you to write me, myweeklymixtape@gmail.com. Hit me up on all the social media haunts at myweeklymixtape. Join the Mixtaper community at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. There's a free tier just to be a part of it. There's also other tiers if you'd like to get some extras and support the show a little bit more. I'm appreciative either way. You can also hit up myweeklymixtape.com through the contact form. Let's keep this conversation going beyond the episode. Also, use those same channels if you have an episode idea that you want to hear me tackle in the future. Send it my way. I will add it to this randomizer. I will click the wheel next week and we will see what comes up. I want to hear your playlist ideas. They could be serious. They could be fun. They could be nostalgic. They could be off the rails. Send them in. I'm going to add them in. Let's see what happens here because the sky is the limit. I am so excited for what we've got going on this season of My Weekly Mixtape, and I hope you're enjoying this new series of episodes the way I am enjoying recording them and talking music with all of you. Once again, my name is Brian Colburn. This has been My Weekly Mixtape, and until next time, enjoy listening to the 10 hairband songs that I think broke the mold and still rock today. Can't wait to hear your thoughts. We'll see you next time.